Listen, I don't have much time to explain this. The Swifties have taken over. My channel's compromised. I'm not given an option. I need to. They're here. Shit, they're here. Hey everyone, not sure who that was at the beginning. Anyway, I've been getting an insane amount of support for my Taylor Swift discography video, and I can't thank you guys enough. This kind of growth wasn't like anything I've seen before on my channel for the past 3 years, and I'm so glad most of you all enjoyed that video, especially since I put genuine effort into that project. If you're new around here, hi, welcome. This is part 2 of a previous video I made where I ranked Taylor Swift's entire discography based on my first listen, so if you haven't watched that first, this video may be a little confusing to you. Let's get one thing straight though, this is the last time ever Taylor Swift is going to be discussed on this channel, or at least I think. This is the final reckoning of the Taylor Swift saga, so if any of you are here solely because you're a big Swiftie, I don't recommend subscribing. In fact, I'd even encourage unsubscribing. I want to move on to broader topics, or topics that interest me more on a personal level. As while the Taylor Swift project was surprisingly fun to work on, I can only imagine how much more fun it would have been if the projects were about things I genuinely took interest in. By the way, I read and respond to all comments, so leave a comment if you want to. Is that many of the more dedicated members of Taylor's fanbase were a little upset that I didn't review the full discography and missed out on the good stuff, like we're talking page 2 of Google type shit here. And I'd ignore these comments if I saw a couple of them, but a surprising amount of you seem oddly passionate about the Taylor's version containing all the good stuff. And to that I cynically say, are you sure? Like, don't get me wrong, for dedicated fans of her work, I'm sure there's a reason to gravitate towards the re-recorded Taylor's versions of her past records and the exclusive B-sides released along, but I'll be completely honest, I'm a little skeptical going into this. I'm jumping into this project with a very strong belief that nothing here will beat how much I enjoyed, let's say, Folklore. Maybe a more polished version of her earlier works could boost a couple points up on ranking and can be appealing to the fans, but I personally just don't see it happening with me. I understand that this is a little bit more of a pessimistic approach going into it, but I also just want to get over with this just because so many of you seem to want my opinion on those. I also have a sneaking suspicion that most of you just like Taylor's versions not because the music is objectively better, but because it supports the artist. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'd probably be doing that too if something similar happened to my favorite artists, but I also can't shake off the feeling that there's a tiny bit of bias at play here. So to clarify, these criticisms are directed towards her music, not her as an artist. I have a strict philosophy of separating art from the artist, and I overall support her decision to take control of her own intellectual properties. But if songs sound bad to me, I'm gonna say it. So there's your trigger warning because I forgot to include that in my last video, so there. Now here's how this is gonna work. I frankly don't have the time nor motivation to commit to listening to the entire discography plus the From the Vault tracks, so I'm just gonna be listening to all 4 Taylor's version albums. This also won't be a ranking like the last video, so I'll just briefly say at the end whether I feel like the TV is better or worse than the original. I'm sorry that the intro's still long and drawn out, I'm working to fix it, but with that out of the way, let's jump straight into... In my previous video, I wasn't very kind to Fearless, giving it a ranking of the worst Taylor Swift album and calling it dog shit, which in hindsight was a little cruel considering she was 17 at the time of writing it, as many of you pointed out. But that doesn't change the fact that the tracks mostly landed really flat. The songwriting was all over the place and overall didn't make any noticeable improvement from the self-titled record, continuing a stale formula. Going into Fearless TV, I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, because I obviously couldn't ask for better songs altogether, as at the end of the day, it's just a re-recording of the same album, with same lyrics, same chord progression, same composition, with the biggest difference, I guess, being vocal performance, production, and mixing. But one immediate problem I suspected going into these records became abundantly clear when listening to Fearless TV, and that was the vocal performance. While compositionally and production-wise the songs sound nearly identical, the maturation of Taylor's voice, since it's almost been like 20 years since she first performed these songs, acts as like a double-edged blade, as in, while the songs sound more listenable at a surface level since she's obviously improved over the years as a vocalist, it also thematically contradicts the album itself because, as many of you pointed out in the comments in my previous video, Taylor Swift's discography is difficult to truly understand and appreciate without the context of the place she was in at the time of writing them, which is why many Swifties found my ranking on objective music interesting. Compared to the later works, the earlier half of her discography seemed to have garnered a liking from the fanbase mostly because of her unapologetic honesty as a teenager to adolescent girl figuring life out, which can be seen as endearing to many. The problem with her new vocal performance is that while the singing sounds like it's coming from a more experienced vocalist technique-wise, that's almost a negative for the record of this kind. Fearless contains immature, doesn't know better kind of lyricism of a hard-eyed teenage girl, but when a grown adult starts singing these songs, it just sort of like the songs essentially sound like a grown adult living in denial of one's age, still living delusionally in a teenage fantasy world. And I like to call this phenomenon the AJR effect, as they are the most notable example of this, but more on that on the AJR video when I eventually get to it. And I know that this is almost intentional, as some could view it symbolically as Taylor's like revisiting her rougher, less polished past and tackling it as a mature woman. I personally don't think that works well with me. Especially with the production and mixing being on par with the original record, the vocal performance really doesn't make a strong case as to why Taylor's version is worth choosing over the original other than supporting the artist personally. And as for the FTV exclusives, I unfortunately didn't really find anything that grabbed my attention. I think the biggest problem is that most of these tracks could have been perfectly acceptable if I had first heard them during the original album sessions, but now that I have more of a well-defined opinion on each of the records, it's difficult to see them as anything more than a part of that cookie-cutter formula or style that defines each of them. I guess the lyrics on Superstar and Mr. Perfectly Fine was nice, and the compositions on You All Over Me and We Were Happy were better than average, but otherwise my opinion on Fearless remains relatively consistent. I think it's definitely her weakest work, and Taylor's version unfortunately fails to convince me otherwise. Speak Now is a good record because it's purple. Okay, but I still believe that Speak Now is the strongest record from the pre-1989 era of Taylor's discography, as it manages to reinforce the themes and songwriting from the previous records while bringing something new and valuable to the table. I had no problem with the original record for the most part, and luckily the re-recording didn't noticeably degrade the quality and sentiment of the time the record was released. The first 14 tracks from the original record don't really have anything notable to comment on, and I imagine this will be the case for most of the re-recorded songs. While it does have the problem Fearless has with like the vocal performance sounding a tad bit older than it should, I overall think it's much less noticeable on Speak Now TV. And to the exclusive, I thought the extras on Speak Now TV were much better than the ones on Fearless TV. Superman was a fun pop folky song with exciting drumming where Taylor is singing about a guy who has left her and is longing for his return, comparing herself to a girl waiting to be rescued by Superman. And Electric Touch had Fall Out Boy featured on it, which I suppose isn't surprising considering how emo rocky Taylor's sound was around this time. I really like how towards the second half the heavy distorted guitar kicks in with Patrick Stump's verse, which is not only a fun homage to the band's sound that they're known for, but thematically fits in with the, well, electric feeling of taking risks for a potential romantic relationship. When Emma Falls in Love is lyrically the most interesting of the bunch, about observing the relationships of the eponymous character from an outsider's perspective, also discussing themes of how friendship can work when one is in a romantic relationship. And finally, I can't say From the Vault was not just a bunch of wasted time, because I Can See You is probably my favorite track associated with the record. The dark, cynical tone set up by the electric guitar and the distorted synth create like an audio texture that's just so catchy and intriguing. While the chorus wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, the vocal performance on this song was also immaculate, especially with the low-key, almost seductive performance during the verses and the ad-libs. Paired with the next track, Castles Crumbling, featuring a heavy bass line and quick-paced percussions, it demonstrates the indie rocky sound that Taylor would later explore down the road, and it was surprising to see how early on it was first experimented with. I overall felt like Speak Now was the first TV record that genuinely was worth spinning over the original record, as the From the Vault tracks actually added something of value to the album and made for a better listening experience. Putting Red as the second worst Taylor Swift record was probably my most controversial ranking, and I'm ignoring Fearless at worst because whichever album I put as worst, I was gonna get smoked regardless. I know you all too well. But if the problem with me hating on Fearless was mostly, oh, she was 17 when she wrote this, The majority of you pointed out that Red TV makes it like infinitely better than the original Red, and how I'll definitely change my mind after giving it a listen. Oh, you really think so? Well, let's see. I'll be completely honest, I barely paid attention to the re-recorded songs. And that's not to say I was like half-assing this project. What that does mean though is there wasn't much to redeem from a re-recording. If you for some reason recall from the album ranking video, my main problem with Red was how blatantly Taylor tried to fuse EDM into her folksy sound. And let me tell you, folk and EDM don't go well together. And unfortunately, upon checking the songs I marked as stupid EDM like 22 and Starlight, it's unsurprisingly not fixed. And there is a 10-minute version of All Too Well everyone was talking about. While I don't think that this song, or any song in particular, should warrant a 10-minute version unless you're like an experimental post-rock band, I do think that it's one of her strongest tracks from the pre-1989 era, especially with how nicely the percussion blends in with the more traditional folk sound, so good job fixing that song. Additionally, I believe that for the first time the re-recorded vocal performance on Red does make the album experience a tiny bit more enjoyable, so there, but overall those didn't make me suddenly think more highly of the album as a whole, and this is where the From the Vault tracks kick in. Excluding the 10-minute track, Red TV offers 8 exclusive tracks never before seen. I overall feel like these tracks provide a more believable transition from folksy sound to 1989's pop texture than the entirety of the track listing prior. And this is especially noticeable on tracks Babe and Message in a Bottle, the latter of which is so much more polished with the synth sound that I'd believe it if someone told me it was like a 1989 B-side. While it sounds like Taylor is moving on, she also ensures that the folk sound she's worked with is more or less mastered, especially with the track I Bet You Think About Me featuring Chris Stapleton, which I thought was one of her better duet songs. But I'm sorry, that other track she did with Ed Sheeran, look, I'm a big fan of Ed Sheeran, and that's why I have to be his biggest hater. It's difficult to explain, but I hate him because I like some of his songs. I will say it's better than Everything Has Changed, but I personally don't think Taylor and Ed's voices sound good together. Overall, Red TV does offer a more solid sound throughout its returning track listing, and the exclusive tracks provide a better closure to her sound until then. Do I think the album is better? Kind of. Do I like Red TV now? Sonically, lyrically, and everythingly speaking, I didn't have much problem with 1989. But here's a plot twist. I actually do have a problem with 1989 TV. I don't know what exactly happened during the recording sessions, but the mixing on this album is just horrible. I could especially tell how much more different the tracks sound on the bigger hits like Bad Blood and Shake It Off, and while it can be written off as the songs just sounding slightly more unfamiliar, I disagree. Certain channels are a lot more obfuscated than some of the less important ones on many tracks, and it feels like there's a lot more emphasis on Taylor's vocals rather than the instrumentals. And I don't like that because the thing I like most about 1989 is how well mixed and well produced the sound texture was. If I wanted a good singer-songwriter album, I'd be spinning Folklore or even some of her earlier works that I ranked lower than 1989. This record isn't supposed to be this, like, personal, if that makes any sense. 1989 is exactly what I feared going into this project. The instrumentals don't sound as bold and bombastic anymore. It sounds more soft, dialed back, and almost muted. In many ways, Taylor's version re-recording kind of ruined this album for me, and while I wasn't going to revisit these albums anyway for the most part, if I ever decide to, I'm definitely going to be listening to the original record. Sorry, but not sorry. But whatever, maybe the From the Vault tracks will atone for the sins of the butchered classics on the record. 1989 TV features 5 exclusive tracks, so I'll just go over each and every one of them. Slut is a song about how the media calls Taylor a slut, and how she's okay with that. This theme is later reinforced in Reputation, and I guess that's a cool glimpse into what's to come next. But the song itself wasn't really interesting, to be honest, and Say Don't Go has a fun post-chorus and decent production. Now That We Don't Talk is a catchy track about girls gossiping. Suburban Legends was alright, and Is It Over Now was a decent okay, look, I have to be honest, that's my entire shtick. I didn't like this record. Hate it even. I just was bummed out in the first half because all the songs I remember enjoying were robbed of their energy, and From the Vault exclusives weren't interesting enough to salvage it either. If Fearless made the album slightly worse, if at all, with the Taylor's version, 1989 is dead! Look how they massacred it! Bad album. Listen to the stolen version. Fuck you. I imagine I'm speaking as a lot of you are typing angry comments down below, which I do expect, but I'm fully ready to embrace that. It's a fun rage bait, and I frankly don't care enough to be angry about an album being butchered, because at the end of the day, it's not like the original version has been wiped off the internet or anything. Plus, I think that the other three TV records, Fearless, Speak Now, and Red, overall did a great job in making a stronger case for themselves, and for the most part, it's an improvement. But this entire video kinda misses the point of the re-recording project of Taylor's discography. That was because of a contractual conflict she had over her label company or whatever, and I'm all for artists taking control of their own intellectual properties and fully support her decision to be doing what she's doing. At the end of the day, Taylor seems to make music exclusively for her fans, albeit in an extremely suspiciously radio-friendly sound. And as long as she's happy and her fans are happy, who am I to objectively evaluate the re-recorded albums? And I think that's gonna do it for this video, so... Yeah? What? Oh. Do I really have to... Fine, I'll talk about the deluxe edition tracks. May as well bury the hatchet. All of the Girls You Loved Before is the only exclusive track on Lover. It's an interesting take on your lover's past lovers, with lyrics talking about how, while at a surface level, talking about your partner's exes can be a sensitive topic, but at the end she's somewhat grateful as they shaped her partner into who he is today. Compared to the relatively shallow and all over the place theme of Lover, I thought this was a surprisingly cool concept for a song and sonically fits right into the rest of Lover, albeit a lot more dream poppy. Good song, definitely one of the better ones on Lover. After putting Folklore at the top of my rankings, many of you recommended that I check out The Lakes, an exclusive from Folklore. Since I already was extremely content with all of the tracks on Folklore, with additional recommendations from seasoned Swifties, I had no doubt going into this track, and luckily I wasn't proven wrong. With calm guitar strumming and folksy string sections, The Lakes create the cottagecore theme built up throughout the entirety of Folklore. But the lyrics are what really surprised me, as it was surprisingly poetic. I guess that sounds cheap, especially since the word poet is in the chorus, but it almost sounds more like Taylor is calmly reading a poem she wrote, rather than singing words on a song. Lyrically, the song's about how she wants to escape from all the crazy online urban life she's been living, and just run into the woods and the lakes, living peacefully among nature. And I think the song lyrically and sonically captures that sentiment extremely well, which is unsurprising since, hey, it's Folklore. I will say though, I do have to deduct a few points because she used the word tweet in the lyrics, and we all know you can't do that. The song was like a 9 out of 10 before, but now I can't give it anything higher than a 2. Unfortunate. Midnights has a deluxe edition rightfully dubbed the 3 AM edition, featuring 7 exclusive tracks. I almost didn't want to listen to these, mostly because of how much I liked how Midnights had a conclusive finish, as I had a fun interpretation as to what Mastermind means in the context of the album's concept. But I suppose it makes more sense to think of these as songs that couldn't fit in with the confines of the concept record, so I gave it a shot anyway. There are certainly songs that reinforce the theme built by the album, like Bigger Than the Whole Sky and Would've, Could've, Should've, but many of the songs don't feel like it aligns with the concept of Midnights. For instance, The Great War is a metaphor for a rocky conflict in a relationship, with the song thematically being about how, after going through hardships, couples can emerge stronger than ever before. And Paris is just a storytelling detour about how being consumed in a relationship is. High Infidelity is another song about, you guessed it, infidelity, which in my opinion has been perfected with Illicit Affairs, but nice try 2023 Taylor Swift. And I also think that if it wasn't associated with Midnights the album, Glitch would be one of my favorite songs by Taylor, with its fun glitchy sound effects and heavy bass synth melody carrying the song, but since Midnights is supposed to be a concept album, I find it a lot more difficult to fit it into the themes of the record. But in a sense, I guess that's for the better, because there's a reason that these tracks were cut off from the album for one reason or for another. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with any of the tracks on 3 AM edition, I can now appreciate how it's placed in a deluxe edition for dedicated fans who want more, similarly to how, like, the DLC content isn't accounted for when talking about a video game. It's a kind gesture to the fans who genuinely care for your work, revealing what went into the creative process behind. So overall, Midnight's 3am edition works well as its own separate compilation album, and is sonically and lyrically solid. I already made a conclusion before and I was rudely interrupted, so I got nothing more to say. Oh, if you're still here, I assume you were, like, at least slightly interested in the stuff I make, so ever since the Taylor Swift video blew up, I've been thinking about what other videos to make, as I can't be pandering the Swifties for the rest of my online presence. So far, I got a few ideas in mind, but if you have anything you'd like to see me talk about, whether it be like artists' discography dives or albums or anything like movie reviews or extensive video essays, I really hope that you leave a comment down below. I try to read and reply to all my comments, which isn't hard since my channel isn't very big, so your input matters. Overall, thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for what's in store. Goodbye.